What's a fact that sounds fake but is actually legit? That if you knock your tooth out and put it back in the socket, it will grow roots back and save the tooth. Google says you're not lying. Have an upvote. I know people that this worked for them, but I knew a girl that didn't get it reattached quickly enough after a softball event, and although they fixed it in her mouth, you can tell it's a slightly different color and never grew back. Basically, it seems to have a statute of limitations on it. Saddam Hussein was given the key to the city of Detroit in 1980. Other people given this honor: Stevie Wonder, Jerome Bettis, Steve Eiserman, Elmo, Big Sean and the Jackson 5. I don't even know how I feel about all that. Speaking of sounds, air is a terrible transmitter of sound. Because we hear through the air, we naturally think it's very effective, but gases are terrible at transmitting vibrations. Air gaps are actually a very common and effective tool in soundproofing as well. The US Marshals are still looking for the 3 guys who escaped from Alcatraz in 1962. They just disappeared off the face of the earth, and no bodies washed up in San Francisco Bay or anywhere nearby, despite the official investigations suggesting they drowned before they could reach dry land. The investigation into their escape can't officially end until they reach their 100th birthday. Isn't it likely that they were just dragged into the open sea with the way the currents flow? The Bay Area? I don't remember exactly, but I think some scientists simulated the whole thing and there was only a small chance that they would make it. Komodo dragons can reproduce asexually. Edit: when humans fall, the Komodos shall rise. I actually learned about this in my biology class last week. The professor asked us to give differences between plants and animals, and I said that animals reproduce exclusively through sexual reproduction. They pointed out that Komodo dragons, and some species of lizard that is 100% female, make that incorrect. Oh, and some jellyfish reproduce through budding. Okay, so I just asked the TA and he said the difference is that animals arise from embryonic tissues and plants get their carbon sources from the ground air. Having 6 fingers is actually a dominant trait, but the genes for it are so incredibly rare that pretty much no one has it. The state of Maine has more black bears than black people. Edit: 15,000 black people. 30,000 black bears. You mean African American bears? Also, the average age of Maine residents is higher than any other state in the US at 44.6 years old. And you notice that living here too. Pluto has not gone halfway around the sun since its discovery. Didn't even get to do a half revolution, from being found, to being a planet, to no longer being a planet. Edit: now I'm learning that it might regain planet classification. What a wild ride our little buddy has been on. There have been over 2,000 nuclear bomb detonations. America has nuked America more times than any other place, second is Britain I think. John Tyler, born 1790, has 2 living grandchildren as of 2017. Not great-grandchildren, just regular grandkids. I think he was in his 80s when he had a son, and his son was also pretty old when he had these 2. The best thing for you to do if you're stung by a tarantula hawk wasp is to lie down and scream. Edit: laying down prevents you from falling over/hurting yourself when you're in the throes of pain, and the screaming helps cope with the pain level. Nothing else is really going to help you. There is a point in the Pacific Ocean named Point Nemo, which is the furthest point from land. In fact, it is so far from land, the nearest humans are often astronauts in the International Space Station when it passes overhead. The ISS orbits the Earth at a maximum of 416 kilometers, while the nearest inhabited landmass to Point Nemo is over 2,700 kilometers away. That Netflix was founded a year before Google. Google was actually something of a latecomer. The first generation of internet companies made people rich, then crashed before very many people even knew what Google was. It is thought that mitochondria, the powerhouse of the cell, were originally separate organisms that our ancestors' cells took up to form a symbiotic relationship, through a process called endosymbiosis. That's why mitochondria have their own DNA, which biologists call mTNA for short, and a single, circular genome, not unlike the structure of other bacterial genomes. This is called the endosymbiosis hypothesis of origin, and it's also thought to be the case for chloroplasts, which are a part of plants that have a role in photosynthesis. Edit, phrasing. The Amazon forest is fertilized by the Sahara. Edit, Sahara, not Saharan, Sahara not Sahara Desert, because Reddit is a pain in my grammar ass. Edit 2, Eli 5 is as simple as wind. The phosphorus the Amazon needs to stay fertile travels through the wind. The 15 to 20 largest container ships in the world create more pollution than all of the cars in the world. Container ships and cruise liners use some of the nastiest fuel available anywhere. The largest air force in the world is the US Air Force. The second largest air force in the world is the US Navy. Harvard University is over 100 years older than the United States. My high school was founded in 1660. It's also the reason why Yale was founded, because none of the graduates had anywhere to go. The Pacific Ocean is so large that there is a point where you could tunnel straight through the Earth, and when you come out the other end, you are still in the Pacific Ocean. Also, there is at all times a pair of points on opposite sides of the Earth, where both the temperature and air pressure are the same. And this is true for any two continuous variables. Canada has a smaller population than California. Toronto, Montreal and Vancouver cover 1/3 of the population in Canada. A polar bear's liver contains enough vitamin A to kill a human if eaten. You don't even have to eat all of it, just a few ounces. This comes from seals, whose livers will also cause you to overdose on vitamin A. Polar bears just happen to eat a lot of seals. Did some research into this because I was curious. It turns out that this trait is actually symmetrical for when a polar bear eats a human's liver. In this case, it turns out the human still dies. The longest domestic flight in the world is in France, Paris to Réunion. Until April of next year. Then it'll be overtaken by flights between Boston and Honolulu. Edit, distance is actually still Paris to St. Denis. But the time in air is expected to be longer from Boston to Honolulu. 11 hours 10 minutes versus the projected 11 hours 40 minutes Boston to Honolulu flight. Around the 1680s in France, it became fashionable to wear bandages around your butt in order to pretend that you had surgery done on it. King Louis XIV had an anal fistula that needed to be operated on to fix, and when it was successful, people began faking it and going to surgeons even when they didn't have the condition. People who couldn't get it done just used bandages to mimic it. The surgeon who was in charge practiced for 6 months on over 70 people beforehand, none of whom had that condition. And even before doing that surgery practice, he attempted other remedies like special baths or drinks on another group, none of whom had that condition either. Apparently the only ones present for the surgery were the surgeon, 4 doctors, his war minister, or chancellor? Don't recall the exact title, and his commoner mistress. His war minister held his hand for the duration of the surgery. For more fun facts like this, check out the podcast No Such Thing as a Fish. Great podcast, really funny, and it's one of the highlights of my week. The Giza pyramids were built when mammoths still roamed the earth. By the time Queen Cleopatra took the throne, the Great Pyramids were already ancient, crumbling ruins. If you have $10 in your pocket and no debts, you have more wealth than 25% of Americans. I was so ready to count myself lucky until I remembered my student debt. There was no grass in dinosaur times. It just seems so strange because it's so ubiquitous today. There wasn't? What used to be on the soil then? This is a mistake. Grass was not widespread, but it did exist. There were no grasslands or fields of grass as we know it today, but there is evidence that grasses were a type of plant present in the age of the dinosaurs. The evidence for them is shown via pollen samples found in sediment and plant cells found in coprolite, which have a structure that is exclusive to grasses. At its furthest away point, you can fit every planet in our solar system between Earth and the Moon. I think it's just barely, though. Right? Edit, yeah. Of the 234,555 miles to the moon, you could fit all planets in with about 5,000 miles to spare. Water is a bad conductor of electricity. Pure water absolutely is an insulator. Water is also really good at containing things that are good conductors of electricity, therefore most water, non-pure water, is a good conductor of electricity. I had a chem teacher show this off. It blew our 6th grade minds. She took a beaker of pure H20 and had this setup of a light bulb and had it plugged in. The wire ran down this plastic piece and then broke and then lead back up to another wire to the light bulb. She said, "I can't touch both contacts because I would die, duh. But if I take this water," and she then submerged the plastic piece and the connection into the beaker of water. And nothing happened. She even stuck her finger in the water. Then she took a beaker with tap water and the light bulb shined. We were just shocked. The world's largest desert isn't the Sahara. It's the entire continent of Antarctica. Deserts aren't measured by grains of sand or amount of camels, it's all about precipitation, and Antarctica takes the cake. The roughly 5.5 million square mile continent only gets about 8 inches of rain a year. Googleplex is such an absurdity huge number that if you wanted to try and write it out you'd need a tool that could imprint on subatomic particles. Also, there aren't enough subatomic particles in the universe to even write the number. A Googleplex has nothing on Graham's number, which would cause your head to collapse into a black hole if you knew it in its entirety, or tree 3, which is larger than Graham's number 2. A chihuahua is more closely related to a grizzly bear than to a hyena. Makes sense. Have you ever met one of those things? Well, seeing as hyenas are actually more closely related to big felines than canines, it makes sense. Hyenas only share traits with dogs because of convergent evolution. Same thing with wasps and bees. Wasps are actually closer to ants. If you shuffle a standard deck of cards, it is basically a mathematical impossibility that anyone has ever shuffled a deck of cards into the same order you just have.